the all in all. In this particular conversation, we're going to discuss some quotes from James Allen, as well as the book The Kybalion, otherwise known as the Seven Hermetic Principles. And we are going to reflect upon this idea of embracing complexity on our journey in relation to the idea that there is an original simplicity. In other words, in all chaos, there is a divine order. We have within us what we would call the subconscious mind. Beyond the subconscious mind is a subconscious realm. It is a subconscious world. This is the all that exists, and more so each day, we understand it through our own individualized journey. This all which exists beyond the subconscious mind is what we also refer to as the all in all. Now, how this pragmatically translates is to the idea and key part of the philosophy that we have within us infinite potentiality and infinite possibility, because we were created in the image of the Creator. To further stimulate this discussion, let's reflect upon this important quote here from James Allen. He said, "Man evolves outward to the periphery of complexity and then evolves backward to the central simplicity. When a man discovers that it is mathematically impossible for him to know the universe before knowing himself, he then starts upon the way which leads to the original simplicity. He begins to unfold from within, and as he unfolds himself, he enfolds the universe." Now, we can look at it from a few perspectives in relation to the discussions we've been having lately, especially the concepts of fourth dimensional thinking, speaking as if the unseen is seen, being imitators of God as dear children. It is stated that the way, sometimes the way is also referred to as the word, as we are given the two gifts of speech and mind. In the Kybalion, it's stated that all is mind. All is also one. We take things apart in our mind so that we can understand the nature of our reality and put it back together again. That stated, this entire experience that we're having is in a way one mind. However, it's also individualized, as in I have an individual self that I call Joseph. You have an individual self or an identity or a state, as Neville Goddard refers to. And these are individualized states or individualized identities. They are states that exist in the universal mind or the one mind. When we can see this relation between the individualized minds and the one mind, we begin to understand the concept of original simplicity. Now, as we reflect upon that, we recognize that unnecessary complexity and convolution arises from self-delusion, not knowing yourself. Simply put, what do you desire? What do you want to create? Or more accurately put, what do you want to experience in the already complete world? All of creation is complete. All things exist in the eternal now. What do you want to experience? As a result of honoring and going down the pathway that is accurate to you, to the fulfillment of that experience, you start to understand yourself and understand how you fit into a relationship with the five sensory experience, inner world and outer world harmony. That's one of the great benefits of picking a goal and seeing it all the way till completion. Self-delusion starts to taper away out of consciousness and is replaced with what we call wisdom. And you've probably heard me say this many times. We say knowledge plus experience equals wisdom. So you acquire knowledge and you put it into experience, as in you apply the information that you're learning. And from that, you acquire wisdom. Whenever we are learning a subject, no matter what it is, there's different degrees of that subject, different levels of that subject. You start with the fundamentals, you put it into action, And then as you graduate from that experience, you take on what is otherwise referred to as a more complex element of that subject, built on that foundation. If not, we make things more complicated than they have to be. If we consume more and more advanced, especially the very deep philosophical and spiritual texts, we might find ourselves lost in that information, thus lost in our understanding of relationship between the inner and outer world, and otherwise identifying with, again, what I refer to as mental chatter. Say you have a goal, and your goal is to create success. So you conjure up in your mind's eye the exact outcome, that which you desire to see brought forth. You affirm it on the subconscious mind, and you know it's done. The inner world is now harmonizing to bring it forth into externalization on what we call the screen of space, the five sensory experience. It is based on our interpretation of how we believe reality to be, more accurately put, our ability to allow the five sensory reality to rearrange to reflect the rearrangement of the mind of the chosen state, the ideal image. So what do? We maintain the inner dialogue in relation to that state of mind. We carry on our conversations, inner conversations, from what we call fourth dimensional thinking. The unseen is seen, and seeing everything that shows up in the five sensory experience to the best of our ability as in harmony and in relation, not holding us back, not stopping us, not breaking our flow, unless you want to, and seeing it in relation to what we desire to experience. This is also referred to as being in flow or autotelic. And I discussed this a couple of videos ago. I recommend you watch that video. Doing this, we'll understand what James Allen refers to here. He says, looking through the woven network of his own illusions, man sees interminable complication and unfathomable mystery, and so loses himself in the labyrinths of his own making. Let a man put away egotism, and he will see the universe in all the beauty of its pristine simplicity. The gift of speech and mind. We imagine in our mind that what we desire to experience, and we assume it to be done. We allow the subconscious mind and the subconscious realm to take care of the rest. And we contain within our mind the speech that fills up our mind, the inner dialogue, from a place of love in relation to our vision, in relation to people, environment, circumstance, and information. This is how we experience flow and a desirable journey to the fulfillment of our experience. If not, we identify with what is called egotism. Now, egotism is distinct from conscious use of the conscious mind. Egotism can also be grouped in the category of mental chatter. The self-delusion, you could say, that the people, environment, circumstance, and information is preventing you from getting what you truly want, the heart desire. Upon cause and effect reflection, we remove the beliefs and assumptions and the ideas and perspectives, and thus remove the complication within. And then what happens is we don't find ourselves lost, as he puts it here, losing himself in the labyrinths of his own making. Thus, by identifying with the mental chatter, dwelling in it, more complexity, convolution, and unnecessary complexity on the pathway to the fulfillment of what we desire to create. Now, based on this, again, it comes down to the conscious use and practice of the two gifts. We were given the gifts of speech and mind, inner speech and mind. Through the gifts of speech and mind, we have access to the subconscious realm. We also have access to bring forth what we desire. Thus, guidance can be found within or externalized as outer world signs and synchronicities. as well as accurate understanding of the five sensory experience. We reveal the same wisdom as others while on distinct life paths. This is something that we'll notice when we are on the right thinking pathway of understanding. By looking at reality from a place of love, by looking at others from a place of love, everything to the best of our ability from a place of love, we find that others are on their own distinct life paths. They're also on the journey of identifying and living their true self. And these distinct life paths reveal wisdom and understanding, outer world experience, specialized knowledge, otherwise referred to, that we can learn from. Certainly, we invest a lot of time learning from others based on their distinct life paths. And one of the goals, should we choose to go down that pathway if we want to, is to also help others and bring it down into sharing our own experiences to help others also make sense, to understand and embrace complexity. Because, as mentioned, none of this is in denial or argumentation of complexity, but rather embracing complexity, recognizing that as we harmonize the inner world through love-based inner voice conversations and understanding, maintaining our flow, simply put, what I had discussed in a couple videos ago, we will start to notice that we're better equipped to deal with complexity. That, you could say, is the textbook definition of flow, as discussed in Mihai Csikszentmihalyi's book, Flow. And that is where challenge meets skill. Challenge in which you are engaged with is found with the belief within yourself that you can meet up with that challenge. You can work with that challenge. You can harmonize with that challenge and experience flow. If something is too challenging, or we perceive it, keyword is perceiving it, as too challenging, then we see it as overwhelming amount of complexity. Thus, we feel overwhelmed by it and lose our flow. Thus, maintaining flow, and another way of looking at it is being in the eternal now, which is also discussed from where I pull these quotes from, which is The Heavenly Life by James Allen. That's where we find the original simplicity. James Allen also refers to this as the original and universal reality, as this quote states here. He who has found the indwelling reality of his own being has found the original and universal reality. So you can distinguish it. We can say there's a universal reality, one that embraces both complexity and simplicity, and thus bringing it into simplicity. Or there are other realities, as he refers to, as losing himself in the labyrinths of his own making. In other words, we're creating realities, or more accurately put, going down the infinite potentiality pathway to experience what we desire from a place of unnecessary complexity and convolution. Arriving at original simplicity, opacity disappears, and the universal transparency becomes apparent. Nothing is being held back from us except our own ways of thinking, assumptions, and beliefs that interpret the five sensory experience and the inner world as holding things back from us. I find from thousands of conversations that I have with entrepreneurs and whoever on the journey to create whatever kind of success, it has to do with overly identifying with so much different conflicting and opposing opinions and viewpoints on the same topic. Many different nuanced slants and positions and posturing and whatever else that goes on, and present a distinct position on that information. Good book to read is Positioning by Al Ries and Jack Trout, and then you'll really understand how positioning works in marketing, and understanding that anyone who applies marketing is probably using the concept of positioning to help you see reality from a certain nuanced distinction. The overconsumption of too many nuanced distinctions may lead to being overwhelmed by complexity. I get this a lot in my consulting business, I get clients that come up to me and say, I learned this marketing strategy and that selling strategy and these 15 other marketing strategies, and each of the consultants says I should do it their way. Now I'm confused. And then I say, well, we have lost our connection to our true inner voice. We are identifying with mental chatter. One of those, or a varying degree of each of those in combination, is perhaps the one, or you might find your own distinct way within. But one of the things we have to do is take the responsibility to ensure that we are consuming an adequate amount of information, not being overwhelmed by the large amount of information that's available. And always relate it back to your vision. You want to keep it simple? Maintain flow, number one. Number two, be lighthearted about the journey. Realize that everyone is contributing from many different perspectives, but you have the power to choose what is in relation and harmony with what you desire to create. Thus, arriving back to the original simplicity. And from there, he says, opacity disappears. Now, what does this mean? It means the own self-delusion-based layers of smokescreen that we have been creating as a result of overwhelming ourselves with unnecessary complexity is no longer there. And thus we're able to see things the way they need to be seen. Also stated from the Kabbalion, everything is and isn't at the same time. That means there are many ways of looking at whatever five sensory experience that we are having, be it information in this regard. And what you're looking for is what is in relation and in harmony, the accurate interpretation to your vision. The answers are found within via your inner voice. By the way, this inner voice is individualized as your inner voice, and it's also made universal as the true inner voice of the all. You'll find this as you go deeper into building a relationship with your own inner voice, making a commitment to yourself that you're going to discern from mental chatter and understand the true inner voice. You could also say that it's one inner voice, that the mental chatter and the inner voice is actually one voice. I mean, it is you. But again, we work with the mind to separate things so we can understand and put it back together again. Watch the video I did on discerning between mental chatter and the true inner voice. I'll put a link in the description. He says, knowing the divine heart within, all hearts are known, and the thoughts of all men become his who has become the master of his own thoughts. Therefore, the good man does not defend himself, but molds the minds of others to his own likeness. So a couple of things we brought up in the last handful of videos. The awakened self is being brought forth, and maybe for many of us already brought forth to higher and higher degrees. So we can mold this world of ours into the kingdom of love. And so what are we molding? We're molding people, environment, circumstance, and information. More accurately put, we are finding the original and universal reality that exists based on overcoming our own self-delusion within. So again, this is all one mind, and it's individualized at the same time. When we can embrace those what may appear as conflicting ideas and see it as both, and depending on what we're doing, working on it accordingly. For example, when you have a team together in your company, you work together and you're having a mastermind or a brainstorming session. You value the individual contributions as well as you keep the conversation as a one mind. So all the individual minds come together and bring forth a higher mind, which is able to solve the complexities or see the original simplicity of what we would call the problems that we're having, overcome the problems, simply put, as a result of working with the individual minds and the one mind. Thus, a good mastermind or a good team or a good support group respects the individual minds as well as connects them all together as the one mind. So is and isn't at the same time. Is and isn't at the same time from the Kabbalion is very fascinating to me. I also call this childlike flow. Think of a child at the playground. Child changes its mind and does whatever it feels like doing. It may want to do this, it may want to do that. It's a complete flow. Now, many of us who have lost our childlike curiosity might not understand and think that they're doing a bunch of random things. But quite contrary, they are finding their inner voice connection. They are stimulating creativity. They are bringing forth their true self. And thus, we want to encourage this flow way of being. And we do it by understanding ourselves and encouraging within ourselves to recognize that everything that shows up is or isn't at the same time. And the answer is it depends. Is it related to your vision or is it not? And by the way, a lot of the decisions don't have to be made when you're in flow. Because when you're in flow and you're autotelic, the decisions are made automatically. You'll just know what to do, when to say, how to say, what to say, and why to say it. I was discussing this in the last video. I'm going to talk about this more in the upcoming videos. So now this is some quotes from the Kybalion, the 7 Hermetic Principles. The great fourth principle, the principle of polarity, embodies the truth that all manifest things have two sides. We're going to look at this from the perspective of, so even though we're talking about the one, we're taking it apart in our mind so we can understand, working with the Kybalion's law of polarity. And upon the reflections of our recent discussion, let's look at this quote here from Neville Goddard. We were told we were given 2 gifts to man at birth. It doesn't mean this little birth when I left my mother's womb, but when I left the womb of my father, that is the grand womb, the womb of creation when, before the world was. He created me and made me perfect and set me in this world for a purpose, educative purpose. But he gave me 2 gifts. He gave me his own mind. He gave me the gift of speech, the very thing he used to create the world. So he spoke the world into being, and then gave me the gift by which he spoke the world into being. He gave me mind and speech. If I use the gift wisely and do it rightly, I will be led into the realization, into the fulfillment of my every desire. Not one is beyond my ability to realize. If I continually use it wisely, when I quit this body, as the world calls a man dead, I will leave this into another dimension. By the wise use of the same 2 gifts, I will be brought into the company of the blessed if I awake. So simply put, we awaken and we continue to awaken through the conscious use and the conscious integration of speech and mind. Now, going back to what I was saying earlier, we want to keep this as simple as possible. Pick a goal, any goal, and commit to it and see it all the way till completion. On the journey, you are going to, a lot of times, automatically release yourself from self-delusion, which you can categorize as disempowering programming in relation to yourself, others, people, environment, circumstance, and information. From there, you're going to receive within more desires, instructions, and you'll commit to it because they're your heart desires. You're in love with them. And again, this process will continue, doing what we call purification of the mind. Through this purification of the mind, the concepts that we speak of, and the concepts that are in the spiritual texts that may not make any sense on the surface will make even more sense. Because beyond the stories of the spiritual texts, it is a divine pattern. Those are divine patterns. And this is a journey. So we're constantly moving into higher levels of realization. And if we find ourselves overwhelmed by complexity, thus deviating from the original simplicity, by not experiencing flow in our day-to-day, then we got to ask ourselves, why are we making it more complicated than we have to be? What is the source of this complexity and how can we release from it? Are we over-consuming information? Number 1. Are we getting lost in the identification of too many opposing viewpoints on the aspect that is in relation to your vision, develop the ability to understand. And simplifying it by just testing whatever out and seeing it if it works. As mentioned, this has been one of the key areas in my consulting business. Is I say, if you've got all these different 10 or 15 marketing strategies and you're on the fence about all of them, how about just testing one of them? And the person might say, well, I want to make sure I get it perfect. Again, they're getting stuck in their head. They're creating more unnecessary complexity and convolution rather than testing it and seeing it all the way to completion and recognizing that in the process they will find flow. And then number 2, they will have wisdom. Wisdom of experience. So let's go deeper into this. While the all is in all, it is equally true that the all is in all. To him who truly understands this truth hath come great knowledge, the Kabbalion. So again, while all is in the all, it is equally true that the all is in all. We were created in the image of the Creator, and thus we have the same ability in the individualized people that make up the all. Now, more and more people are realizing this, and they're realizing this through experience. It is stated, the student will, of course, realize that the illustrations given above, and referring to the book, the Kabbalion, and the section in there of the all, are necessarily imperfect and inadequate, for they represent the creation of mental images in finite minds, while the universe is a creation of the infinite mind. The difference being the 2 poles separates them. And yet it is merely a matter of degree. The same principle is in operation, the principle of correspondence. Manifest as above, so below, as below, so above. Now, when we take this quote and relate it back to our discussion, we'll recognize that there are degrees of realization that would appear to disconnect us. Keyword is only appear to disconnect us from our divine perfection. And these degrees of separation are found within. There's no information per se that's denying us in the outer world. We can only interpret that from that perspective if we want to. And by the way, as I'm communicating these things, I'm reflecting back on my own experience and my understanding. From the simple cause and effect reflection that I've had over the years, I take any profound book or spiritual text, and I, to the best of my ability each day, apply what I'm learning through experience. And then go back to the same spiritual text and realize that it looks different. It appears different. I get different meaning out of it. I get different understanding out of it. Now, the way I interpret it in relation to what we're talking about here is that these are the matters of degrees. So in a way, it's not separate, but we create the separation. Now, this is a very important distinction. We create the separation. Realize that the individualized aspects of being in relation to our vision, in relation to whatever, is individualized, yes, and it's all connected and in relation to the one mind. And thus, when James Allen said, knowing the divine heart within, which is what we're referring to, the universal one, all hearts are known, as in you understand people more so. You'll feel a deeper level of connection with people. And the thoughts of all men become his own, who has become the master of his own thoughts. Therefore, the good man does not defend himself, but molds the minds of others to his own likeness. Going back to what we were saying earlier, molding to the likeness of love. And simply put, if you have a business and you've got a team, when you communicate with your team from a place of love, they're going to respond differently. They're going to look like they have been molded in your likeness. But that love can also be referred to as God, which, by the way, is the all that is in all. So earlier I mentioned the concept of positioning. I also brought up the book, which I haven't discussed. It's called Positioning by Al Ries and Jack Trout. The way of looking at this is nuanced distinction. So that book is discussed from the perspective of marketing. And what we do as marketers is we communicate to the marketplace. And we offer our own unique position, otherwise known as the unique value proposition or selling proposition. And we create what is called nuanced distinction or distinction in the marketplace. And as mentioned, because we live in a very connected world, we have access to many different positions on whatever topic and nuanced distinction. And that's how it works. However, the power is within to not be overwhelmed by the nuanced distinction and the positioning we are presented to on various topics. And keep it really simple. It's stated, but remember that whatever be the answer to this problem, if indeed there be an answer, the truth remains. And they're referring to a question, I recommend reading the Kybalion, that the students had asked Hermes Trismegistus, in which Hermes' response was no response. Closed his lips tightly. And this is very symbolic to us. We go overly identified with the idea that the answer is going to be found in the outer world, realizing that we got to go within for certain things. Go into the subconscious mind, into the subconscious realm to find the meaning within. If needed, there be an answer. The truth remains that while all is in the all, as in we are all individual expressions of the all, or individuals of the all, it is equally true that the all is in all, which means that you can find the answer within. And perhaps the answers that you go looking for in the outer world that you don't seem to find, we have to remember what James Allen said here. Man evolves outward to the periphery of complexity and then evolves backward to the central simplicity. When a man discovers that it is mathematically impossible for him to know the universe before knowing himself, he then starts upon the way, otherwise referred to as the path or the word, which leads to the original simplicity. He begins to unfold from within, and as he unfolds himself, he enfolds the universe. And then also in relation to what was said in the Kybalion, the teaching on this point is empathetic. Those of you who are students of Neville Goddard remember when Abdullah closed the door when Neville was trying to make the whole process unnecessarily complex and convoluted by not looking for the answers within and remaining loyal to the unseen reality, because as we always say this, faith is loyalty to the unseen reality. All things exist. So in conclusion, it states, the teaching on this point is empathetic. And we may add the concluding words of the quotation. To him who truly understands this truth hath come great knowledge. And what is the truth? While the all is in the all, it is equally true that the all is in the all. Now, if we overthink this statement, rather than picking a goal and seeing it all the way to completion, we would find ourselves overly identified with the five sensory world rather than harmonizing, overthinking things, being stuck in our head. That's why it's important to get back into flow. Realize that when you pick a goal and you affirm it to be done, it's done. Live in and from that state by carrying on the inner dialogue, inner conversations, to see whatever shows up on the journey to the best of your ability as in harmony and in contribution as you observe the outer world change. This is very much related to the concept of mental alchemy, the idea of rearranging our mind so we could better understand and work with the five sensory elements. Otherwise, we create more complexity and confusion. And you'll see this in today's world. So many breakthroughs that we have in science and technology, in many different schools of thought, are possible because people believe it's possible, and thus we accelerate. And if the identification is with impossible, then it will reflect accordingly in the complexity or the outer world reflection that affirms it. So perhaps an affirmation will help you integrate what was being discussed here. And you could say as follows: I embrace complexity, realizing that I could relate it back to my own inner voice. Through the connection and relationship of my inner voice, which is distinct from mental chatter, I'm able to understand whatever shows up on the journey to the fulfillment of what I desire to experience. As a result, I have a greater ability to understand and embrace the challenges that occur on my journey. This brings me into a higher degree and simplicity of thought, which better allows me to understand my subconscious mind and subconscious realm, and thus also understand the outer world 5-sensory experience. If you want to copy this mind map, the link is in the description. Thank you very much for watching. I'll talk to you soon. Take care.